Hi everybody, Rob here from Pariah Studios, and welcome to this first of a new series on Cinema 4D R18. Now, you've probably seen a few of the new features since C-Graph when it's announced, but I'd like to go through a few of them and just kind of give you a little overview of how some of them work. And of course, the first one that everyone's been talking about is the new fracturing within the MoGraph module. And I posted a quick video, just this one here, which I'll just loop through now. And this is just about one of the easiest things you can do to set up, but it actually uses something that I've not seen anyone else really talking about. So let's jump in and have a look, and I'll show you how I set that up. So I'm going to start off, and I'll do this really simply. I'm going to start off with this cube. Let's just decrease the size, and I built this imagining it was like a road or a bridge or something, so this is kind of the tarmac section. And then I had another one, and I'll just kind of pop this over to the side. Imagine this is the curb or the walkway or whatever. I'll just copy that over, put on that side, and that was really just for look. In fact, you know what, I'm just being silly. Let's get rid of them. We don't need those. Let's concentrate purely on this central section. Okay, so we have this, and we don't need any segments. If we look at it, it's a primitive object with 1 by 1 by 1, and all we need to do to get this working is go to MoGraph, hold down the Option key, and I'm just going to choose Voronoi Fracture. So as soon as I do that, you can see what happens is it breaks this one single cube, which is just 6 polygons, into a selection of segments based on Voronoi noise. So if we have a look at what's going on here, we have a few things. We can control various aspects of the object. Now the first thing that we're going to worry about here is whether we want to see this color or not. The MoGraph selections and weight maps we'll deal about later. We'll deal with them, maybe in another video. But for now, let's just turn this into a single color. Just so I prefer working with edges rather than colors for this kind of work. You can also offset the fragments, so we can just bring these back. So you could actually use this already. You can see that this could be used for many different things, but maybe you're doing architectural visualization. This would be a great way of making floors and walls, stone walls and stuff like that. All you would need to do is either use a plane or another cube, depending on how you're working. Bring this out, and then this darker plane underneath could be your kind of cement layer, and then you could have the bricks here. So let's go back to this cube, and I'm going to select the Voronoi Fracture again. We could do this as a hollow object, so let's kill the frame so we can see this. If we go hollow object, now we might want to make our cube a bit bigger. Now within here, you can just make out that it is making solid objects. And that's important because we want this to be not hollow. We want this to actually be, a kind of a thick, solid piece of asphalt. So let's turn this off, and we'll go to the sources. And sources is where the real power comes into play. And this is made at the moment from one single source, which is a point generator. You can add others, so we could create others, and I'll show you some of those in a minute. But if we click on this, we can see what we've got going on. Now, at the moment, we have point amount, and it's set to 20. So you can see these randomized green points. You can hide them if you want to, by the way. And we have 20 of those, and they're just spread randomly using the Voronoi noise through this cube in a uniform way. So even though they're randomized uniformly, so they're roughly spread the same amount. Excuse me. Let's just crank this up to say 500, just so you can see a bit more clearly how the noise is working. I'm just going to go back to object, and I'm going to default this offset to 0. And you can see this is all, there's no kind of weird overlapping edges. If I turn off the lines, you should be able to see that this is a perfect cube with no weird kind of Phong issues going on, nothing of that sort. Just so you can see that. Right, let's go back in here again. So back to our sources. I've increased the point amount, so we now have 500, and the seed is set to the default. If you, for some reason, don't like this pattern, you can just change that, type in a random number, or save one that you like the look of, and you will get that pattern back. Now, high quality, we're not going to worry about for this. For final rendering, I would. It does help just to smooth out certain issues across a kind of a flat surface. Okay, so let's go back up to distribution type. So at the moment it's uniform, as I suggested, but if we click on this drop down, we can have normal, which starts kind of from the center of the object, and this is the kind of the volume of the object rather than the surface. So don't think of normals as in polygon normals. So now you can see this is starting in the center of the object, and it's working its way out to the edges. And this is what I used for that example that I just showed you. Because I dropped the ball on it and I wanted it to break more where the impact was than at the edges, because that just makes sense, because the kind of the power where that mass impacts the mass of this would obviously have more power here and it would kind of fall off. Now we can also go down to inverse normal, so this would be the other way around, so the edges will now be kind of more broken up than the center, and we have exponential, which starts at one edge and works its way across. Now, the problem with this, and you can change it, so we could turn off the x-axis, which will give us a standard, the original, which is called uniform, but we have these extra controls, so we can do plus or minus in any of the three axes. So we could turn plus, which you're probably not seeing too much there in the y-axis because this object is actually quite thin, but actually if I thicken that cube up, you'll see what that's doing, and you can see that there are more breaks and more segments towards the bottom there. I'm just going to undo that. We go back into here and we can turn that off and turn on Z-axis, and we have more breakages here. So again, thinking of like architectural work, this is quite cool for doing like a mosaic floor maybe, where you want to have more density of color at one end, or if you're doing something physics, this is quite a handy way of doing it. Now, the only problem with this kind of way of controlling a gradient of distribution is that you only have these three axes and it's always going to be linear. There's no way of adding any noise within this structure of this fall off. So what we can do is we can use a shader source. So if I just right click on here and I'm just going to remove that, now we still have a Voronoi fracture, but there's no actual breaking going in. I'm going to go add shader source, and within this shader source, if I just click on it, you can have a custom shader, or we can just add a shader here, and you also have sample mode, which is volume or surface. Volume is fine. We'll show you how that changes in a minute. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to add, let's say, a gradient, just to show you how this works in a similar way to that previous way of doing things with the exponential fall off. So of course with a gradient we have controls over, you know, where the edge is going to start and how kind of big that breakup's going to be. I can move it back the other way and we could have much more breakup with just a small amount of fewer segments toward that end. And of course we can change this so it could be 2dV that way, which is actually going up and down. We could also do radial, which again is not going to show here. Let's do a circular because that will make more sense. And let's just bunch this right up, other way around. Apologies. If I just invert those knots, and hopefully you'll start to see what I'm doing. So with it done this way, now the shader is kind of going through the kind of the object that way. So if I go back to the cube, you'll see what this is doing a bit more clearly. And now I'm going to zoom out here just to show you what we need to do. So similarly to having the distribution source, you need to increase the amount. So swapping between them doesn't keep the same segment count. You need to come in here and add, let's go something quite high, let's go for 1,000. And there you go. So this is an interesting way of controlling the amount of segments you get. For the example I showed you, it's not going to work, but it does give you the opportunity of doing some quite fun things. Now, if we go back into this, we could actually back off and not use a gradient. We can use any of these. We could use, let's use a noise, and let's increase the scale of that noise, bring it right up to something much higher, and we should find, increase the contrast, should find that this is changing the look and the distribution of these pieces quite clearly. So as I said, this isn't how I did my example, but I wanted to show you how you can control your distribution using other sources, not just the one that kind of is set as default. Sorry, I was just thinking while I talk, which is never a good idea. Right, so I'm going to remove this again. Let's just remove that, and I'm going to use distribution source, which is the standard one, and I used a normal. I'm going to use 2000 actually for this, just for speed, because I've got video recording going on as well. I'll use 1000 pieces. I'm reasonably happy with that. I think that distribution looks quite good. If you don't want to see these green dots, if you find them getting on the way, you can hide them. If I remember where that option is. I can't remember where it is. It doesn't matter too much anyway. I'm sure you've probably seen it and I've been looking at it. Also, create Engon surfaces, so you don't end up with something too regular. If I turn that off, you'll find that it's making triangles for everything, and that's really not particularly attractive. So we'll just turn that back on, because you get a much nicer set of chunks that way. Anyway, so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to add a plane, which is going to be just kind of like a floor object, and this is going to live just below that there, and to it I'm going to right click and go simulation tags and collider body. Not using a rigid body, I want it to be a collider. I don't want it to be affected by gravity, and all I'm going to do is reduce the bounce to about, say, 3% and increase the friction to about 80%. Now on this Voronoi Fracture I'm going to add a simulation tag rigid body. I'm going to do the same here. I don't want them bouncing too much, so let's go 5% and 85%. And now I need something to interact. So what I want to do is I want to create a system where something impacts these sections and they fall to the ground in a realistic way. So if I press play now, they're just going to fall onto the floor, and then they'll just kind of shuffle apart a little bit as the physics takes over. So they'll just about to impact and you'll see them just kind of break up. Now that might be useful for certain things, just not for me. For the purposes of speeding this up for you, I'm just going to reduce that down to 500, just make it a bit quicker. So what I need to do is I'm going to add a sphere. Doesn't need to be anywhere near that big. Just lift this up. Now I could use a non-simulated, like physics simulated object, and I could animate it. I could keyframe this where I wanted. I did an example where something kind of crashes into the road and then moves along, which I keyframed, and that works quite well for very specific motions, and it left a trail of kind of destruction through the road. Now that's not what I did for that example though, so let's go to the sphere. We'll add a simulation tag and a rigid body, and this one I will leave a bit bouncier but not too much. Let's go for like 15%, and I still want it to have quite a bit of friction, so 80%. And if I'm just going to make that an icosahedron as well, just because I prefer them for pretty much everything. Hit play, and you'll see we still have a problem. Now this isn't really a tutorial on how to use the physics system, but it's worth just noting that if we take our cube, our Voronoi Fracture, and we change the trigger from immediately until on collision, not only with these settings inheriting the tag and individual elements on all, not only will the destruction happen as the impact of that sphere hits these segments, the dispersal of that physical motion is actually going to start at the impact point and move out as this segment hits this one, and then this one hits this one, and this one hits this one, and so on and so forth. So if I play through this again, you should see that the destruction starts in the center and then kind of waves out. And in fact, there's some pieces that haven't been touched by their neighbors, so you actually get a really quite realistic piece of destruction. You can see that these ones over here didn't get hit at all. Now, if there'd been more bounce in the scene, some of these might have bounced up, hit these, and then the whole thing would completely collapse. But if you're looking to do, you know, a scene with some kind of heavyweight destruction, which looks pretty realistic, this is a really good way of doing it. And there's not really any other way within Cinema 4D you could do that. Certainly not within, if I hadn't been talking, this would have taken all of about 30 seconds to set up. Now I'm going to just go back here and show you another example. So I'm going to just remove that cube for now, and I'm going to add another cube, which I'll just increase in height, but decrease in scale. So imagine that scene in the Matrix where they're in the foyer and the bullets are flying and everything's going badly and lots of destruction in the walls, and the set itself is, you know, kind of bits and pieces flying all over everywhere. Let's just try and recreate that a little bit. So I'm going to take this sphere, and this time I am going to animate it by hand. I'm going to change out the simulation tag, and I'm just going to copy the one from the plane, pop it on there because that's just a collider. My sphere is now tiny. I'm going to go to position keyframes, and let's just that's probably enough actually. Add a keyframe there. I'll go forward 2/3 of a second or something and just push that straight through. I'll keyframe that, and now let's give our cube just a few more bits and pieces to it. Let's go to here. We'll up this now. Now what I'm hoping is going to happen is that, as you would think, if something impacts a pillar at this kind of height here, it's not just all going to disintegrate. You're going to have some from the ceiling which is left. So let's recreate that look by dragging this up. That can be our ceiling, and we should have bits of the pillar hanging from the ceiling. I'm going to add a light as well just to kind of help with this a little bit. Okay, so if I now press play, we should find that we have bits of this pillar. Oh, that was too quick. Okay, so I'm just going to increase the size of this. I think that passed through without hitting anything other than maybe two faces. I'll try again. Yeah, I think that might be just a little bit too quick for the simulation. There we go. So now this is all going to fall down, leaving some of that pillar at the top and possibly a bit at the bottom as well. So this is piling up here. You can see around the existing parts, and that is quite an effect to achieve in such a short amount of time. So obviously there are loads of kind of MoGraph things you can do with this as well, but I wanted to show, just use a bit of physics. You don't need to use just MoGraph tools for MoGraph. You can use them for anything. You can use them for visual effects like this. You could use them for architectural work. You can use them for modeling purposes. You don't have to use them just for doing MoGraph work. So let's go back to the beginning here. I'm going to just delete that sphere, and let's say we were doing something a bit more architectural with it, or even let's just do something a bit more MoGraph with it. We could take this cube, which I'm going to just now increase in size like this. If we go back to our fracture, and there are a few things we can do. So if we go to object, we can come here to sort result, and let's go for Y. So this is now sorting from top to bottom. And if we go to our offset, I'm also going to increase the count here to, let's go to 2000, and I'll keep it on normal. I think normal is fine for this point. You can see we have all these bits, and you know, they look fine, and this is quite fun in its own way. Now the transform tools, if we go to position, this is actually just moving the underlying object. This doesn't transform the noise, so proportionally to the object, the noise itself is staying the same. let's just reset that. If you want to change the noise, so you imagine moving the noise field through the object, we can come back to sources and open up the transformation here, and if we do the same here, we want to move the noise through the object, we can do that. So if you like the pattern but the placement doesn't do it for you, then you can do this, and you can see that's also changing where the kind of the normal is going as well. Let's change that normal to uniform. Okay, that's looking good. I like this. So that looks pretty cool. Right, let's zero that out and we'll look at some of the other things we can do. So let's go to our MoGraph and go to our effectors. And if we take random effector, this just blows them all out, which is, you know, what you'd expect. Now you can change this so it could be scale. In fact, let's go back to our offset, just make that 0 so we can see a bit more clearly what's going on. Go back to our random effector, and if we turn off position and use scale, we can randomize the scale in any or all axes. You can go to uniform and we can just change the scale in all directions. So this is with absolute turned on. If you turn that off, they'll get bigger and smaller. Absolute just kind of starts at 1 and works your way kind of almost equally. And of course you could do your rotation. Okay, but what I really wanted to show is that we can change this in a quite a fun way. And what we're going to do is kind of just set a kind of a fall off. So if we can leave it on random, but actually it works a little bit better on sorted, which only works if you've got Voronoi Fracture set to sort results. So we'll go back to random effector, and if we go to fall off, and we'll add probably a linear will work best here. Let's move it up so it sits within the shape of our cube very roughly, and you can just see how you could do something very similar to the what we did using a gradient to control the distribution, but we're doing this with the random effector. Now if I turn off the sorted option here, if I go back to effector and turn off sorted and put it back to random, it's a very similar result, but it doesn't quite work as well, and I'm not 100% sure why that would be, because of the nature of the effector. But I think what it's doing is changing the order in which this is working. I'm sure somebody can comment who is cleverer than I am to let me know what's going on there. So of course you can always animate this. So if you wanted to have, you know, let's just move this out of the way. So if you wanted to have some cool motion graphics where you're gonna play with the fall off here, and we can keyframe that, and then should probably move forward in time a bit, bring that through. We get quite a cool little animation where the size of this all changes. Now I'm thinking this would be quite good for sci-fi type stuff, but I'm waffling and I've probably shown you what I wanted to show you. I'm definitely going to do more videos on this, and I'm going to show you some more tricks and tips and things that you can do with the Voronoi tools. But there's plenty of other stuff in R18 that I want to cover as well. But as always, if there's anything you would like me to cover, something you've heard about that you've not seen, or you would like to actually see a bit more in depth, then leave a comment below. If you're kind of interested in Patreon, then follow my Patreon page, and you know, please do. If you can spend enough to buy a coffee for me, then support me on Patreon, because it really helps me get these videos done, because it means I can dedicate some time. And subscribe to YouTube, and then you'll get kind of all the updates as they come, and I'll see you all again soon. Thanks very much. I've been Rob. Bye bye.